Good morning. A few weeks ago, I talked about the First World War around Veterans Day, and I referenced the clay and the iron. Well, today we're going to talk about the chest and arms of silver in Daniel 2. And I'm going to try to start out with a little historical context. Greece, 490 BC. The Persian king, Darius I, is defeated in a battle at a place called Marathon by Athenian and Plataean forces. One Greek soldier is told, "Run back to Athens and tell them the good news that we've won." So he runs all the way back, 26 miles. He gives them the good news and he falls dead. Well, you know, Greek soldiers were in better shape than that, so I doubt he fell dead, but the Greeks like to brag. So today, we commemorate that all over the world. You can go to Boston, you can go to New York, you can go to LA, Chicago, and run a marathon. You can right here in Cedar Rapids, I believe they run half marathons. In Italy, Rome is just beginning to grow. The city has enlarged. It's a pretty good sized city, but they're not a conquering power yet, but they're growing. In fact, most of Italy is Etruscan and other countries. Rome wouldn't come along for a little while yet. Now, Darius the Great, we had a sermon here a while back called Roman Roads. Told us about Roman roads. Well, the Roman roads weren't something new because Darius had done that years before. He built a road from Susa to Sardis. It was 1,700 miles long. Now, it wasn't paved like the Roman road. It was packed dirt. And he put outposts all along it, and there was military men there. They were to maintain the road and protect travelers on the road, something completely new, so that when the Egyptians sent their tribute to Susa, pirates wouldn't steal it. And when, you know, all this tribute is coming in from 127 provinces, you got to have a safe road. So this is just the royal road. This is one road. There are other roads branching out in different directions. You have to be able to move an army quickly, so you've got to have a good road. Also, he has what we would know as a Pony Express service. He's got horses stationed all along these roads, and messages need to be sent out quickly. Guy takes the message, rides to the next stop, gives it to the next guy takes his horse, rides to the next stop, and then he gets to the other end, they reply, it comes back the same way. Just like the American Pony Express did. Now, Darius dies in November of 486 BC, and his successor is a guy by the name of Xerxes, his son. Xerxes inherits this country, and there's problems down in Egypt. So he takes his army, and they ride down to Egypt, and they solve that problem. Well, while he's there, he finds out, well, now there's problems over in Babylon. So he rides back to Babylon, and they take care of that problem. They tear the city walls down, and he destroys the statue of Marduk. Doesn't destroy the city, just the walls. Then he returns to Susa, and he's pretty happy with his kingdom. I mean, after all, he's got a kingdom that stretches from Ethiopia in the south to Armenia in the north, from the Hellespont in the west to the Indus River in the east. This is a huge chunk of the world. And in all these places, people are sending tribute to him in Susa. He's satisfied. But some of his advisors say, you know, those Greeks, they humbled your father, and they really need to be taught a lesson. So he puts together a large army. No, he does not underestimate the Greeks, because he puts together a huge army. In fact, the Greeks, you know how they like to brag. They say that Persian army was so big that when they crossed a river, it was dry afterwards. They drank it all up. It wasn't quite that big. But they get to the Hellespont, and it's a mile wide. It's known as the Dardanelles today. It's a mile wide, and it has a fast current. But for the first time in history, he builds a bridge, 2 bridges across the Hellespont, pontoon bridges. He gets them built, And they're getting ready to move, and a storm comes up, and the bridges are washed out. Well, the poor engineers lose their heads. A new batch of engineers are brought up. He sends his priests down, and they whip the sea for being insolent. And they come back, they build 2 more pontoon bridges. They have to make these bridges across these trimarine, I don't know if you know what that means. They have three sets of oars coming out of these ships that they oared. They put them together, and then they had to cover the whole thing with dirt and sod so that the horses would cross, because if the horses can see between boards or something, they won't cross. It takes them a week to cross. So it's a big army. Now they head south. The Greeks know they're coming. And the Greeks, how are we going to fight these people? Well, there's this narrows. You've heard of it. Thermopylae. It's very narrow. The Spartans, who, as soon as they're old enough to pick up a weapon, are trained to fight. They say, we can get there, and we'll block them while the rest of the army gets together. So they go there, and there's another city-state, I can't remember the name, they join them there. And it's the Greek advantage because this Persian army is huge, but it has to go through this bottleneck. So the Greeks hold them off. The Greeks fire thousands of arrows straight up in the air, but the Greeks have bronze swords, or shields. They hold them over their head. The arrows bounce off. They put the shields down and go back to fighting. And for 2 days this goes on. Finally, a Greek farmer thinks, boy, I could really cash in on this. The Persians are going to win anyway. So he says, goes to the Persians, he says, I can show you a way around these guys. So the Persians, they're working their way around this trail, coming around behind. Well, the Greeks aren't stupid. They realize what's happening. And the Spartans, they tell the rest of the Greek army, retreat, we'll stay here and hold them. And this is your legend of Leonidas and the 300. They stay there, and they fight to the death. Now Xerxes' army then heads south. He has a huge navy to support this army, 800 ships. The Greek navy is considerably smaller, but much better equipped. So the Greek navy does the same thing Leonidas did. They found a narrow spot where the Persian navy, again, only part of them go through at a time. And they let them come through, and once a bunch of them got through, they hit them from the flanks. And at this time, you crashed into the other ship. You had a big bowsprit, usually made out of bronze. You hit the other ship and crushed the side in. Or you went alongside of them and you busted off all their oars so they couldn't maneuver. And then your Marines jumped onto the ship and the slaughter started. Now Xerxes is very confident in his navy. So he has his throne set on the beach, and he's watching this battle out there. And after a while, the beach is littered with dead sailors and shattered ships, and he realizes, we've been beaten. And his ships that are still surviving, they turn around to try to head back out the way they came in, but there's 800 of those ships, and those ships that are still coming in collide with the ones trying to get out, and even more chaos ensues. What a mess. Well, this is the king that we're talking about, Xerxes. Back in Susa, probably before this battle, I'm sorry I didn't take the time to figure out just when, probably before he went to Greece, all this tribute's coming in. He's got lots of wealth, and he decides we should have a party. So he throws this big party. He calls all the governors from the 127 provinces, the nobles, the military leaders. He says, come to Susa for this party. It lasts 180 days. Imagine that, 6 months, a 6-month party. And for 1 week in that party, every citizen of Susa is invited to come in and enjoy the feast. Well, at some point, one afternoon, you can imagine all these men getting together, and they're bragging about their wives, probably. And Xerxes says, oh, I got this trophy wife. And he sends his eunuch out to go get Vashti, tell her to put on her crown and come in. Now Vashti is also having a feast, of course, for the ladies. And she does the unthinkable. She says, "No, I am not coming." Man, what a crisis. I mean, what if the queen can say this to the king, what's the average housewife going to do? Is she going to say to her man, "No way, I ain't coming"? So something has to happen here. Somebody has to be punished. It doesn't say this in the Bible, but other writings say that Vashti was supposed to arrive in just her crown. So you can see why she may have been reluctant. She has no respect for the king. So Vashti loses her crown, and she's banished. Once Xerxes' anger subsides, he realizes he misses Vashti, but he can't bring her back. What's he going to do? He's sad, and his servants say, "Well, we got 127 provinces. There's beautiful women in all these provinces. So let's have a beauty contest. And the most beautiful woman from each, most beautiful virgin from each of these provinces can come here. And we'll have another contest." So that's what they do. This is where Mordecai comes in. Mordecai lives in Susa, and he's a Jew. He's a Benjamite. And he was captured at the same time as King Jeconiah. He doesn't let people know that he's a Jew. He tells Esther, "Don't tell people you're a Jew." And he decides to enter Esther in this contest. She is his cousin. When her parents died, he raised her as his own. Well, she won the contest locally, so she goes to the king's palace. For the next year, she's taught how to speak, how to walk, how to wear the appropriate makeup, how to dress. There's a eunuch there who's in charge of this harem. And because Esther was beautiful and lovely, it says, and I think lovely describes her personality, whereas beauty is her physique, she was a favorite also of the eunuch. And he took special care of her, advanced her whenever he could. And every day Mordecai came by to check on her and see how she was doing. He'd walk by outside because he couldn't enter, but he could walk by outside, and then she could come to the window and they could converse, and he could see how she was doing. So for a full year, this goes on. But the day comes, she's to go to see the king. Now, she can take anything in the harem with her that she likes, but the eunuch advises her to just take herself. So she's taken in the evening to the king's chamber. And in the morning, she's picked up at the king's chamber and taken to the second harem. Esther found favor in the eyes of all who saw her, and the king loved her most of all. And he made her queen of his palace in place of Vashti. Now Mordecai, he liked to sit by the king's gate. So one day he's sitting there and he hears these two eunuchs talking, and they're plotting, they're going to kill the king. I don't know, maybe when Xerxes comes out the door, they'll stab him like Julius Caesar was stabbed by Brutus, who knows. But they're plotting. So he lets Esther know what's happening. Esther, in turn, lets Xerxes know that there's a plot against him. He investigates, and these guys lose their heads. Now we come to another character. This guy's name is Herman. Now he's a very important man, and he knows that he's very important. He's second to the king now, He is an Amalekite. He's worked his way up. He's worked hard to get where he is. Now one day, well, the Amalekites, by the way, you remember them from Exodus, right? The Amalekites make war against Israel in the wilderness, and Joshua is tasked to fight them. Moses sends them into battle, and Moses is watching from up on the hillside, and as long as Moses is standing with his arms up, the Israelites are winning. And as soon as he puts his arms down because he's tired, they start to lose. So he has to put his arms up again. And after a while, he gets two guys to come over and they hold his arms up until the battle is won. Those are the Amalekites. And in fact, King David would still be fighting the Amalekites centuries later. Now one day, several of the servants notice that Mordecai doesn't bow when Haman walks by. And they say, Mordecai, the king's order is we're supposed to bow in front of Haman. Why don't you bow? He doesn't tell them. But they keep after him day after day after day. And finally he gets tired of it. And he says, I'm a Jew. I am not going to bow to an Amalekite who's a man who helped slaughter my people. Oh no. The servants go. They go talk to Haman. Haman, did you give this man an exception? Haman hadn't noticed evidently till then. But this really, who is this guy? This Mordecai, this Jew. Who is he to ignore me? And if he's a Jew and he's against me, I'll bet all the Jews are against me. I'm going to find a way. I'll kill them all. So Haman plots, and he plots. And one day he goes into Xerxes, and he tells them their people spread throughout all 127 provinces that oppose our rule, and they should be destroyed. Xerxes gives his royal ring to Haman and tells him to make up a plan to have it done. Haman and his assistants, they draw up this plan. They make 127 copies. They fold it up, they put the wax on it, they put the king's ring, signet ring, in the wax. They send it out by Pony Express. And everybody gets the message. It's supposed to be read in every city. Mordecai is sitting there one day and he hears this decree read out that he and all the Jews are to be killed. He immediately rends his clothes, put on sackcloth, and sits in ashes. All across the empire, Jews do the same, and much fasting and prayer is going up. The Jews are to be killed, men, women, children, and all their goods plundered and given to the kings. Esther is very distressed because she sees Mordecai, but she hasn't heard the command. So she sends her eunuch out to find out what's going on. She sends out fresh clothes for Mordecai, and he refuses them. But because he's in sackcloth and ashes, he cannot come to her. So this trusted eunuch goes out and talks to Mordecai. Comes back, talks to Esther. Back to Mordecai. Back to Esther. And Mordecai says, you've got to do something. Esther 4:11 says, all the king's servants and the people of the provinces know that if any man or woman goes to the king inside the court without being called, there's but one law. All are put to death. Only if the king holds out the golden scepter to someone may that person live. I myself have not been called to the king for 30 days. When they told Mordecai what Esther had said, Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, do not think that the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at such a time as this, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another quarter. But you and your family shall perish. Who knows? Perhaps you have come to loyal dignity for just such a time. Then Esther says in reply to Mordecai, Go gather all the Jews found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. And neither eat nor drink for 3 days and 3 nights, and I and my maids will also fast as you do. After that I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. Mordecai then went away and did everything Esther had ordered him to do. Esther and her maids, they fast for 3 days, and she prepares herself and goes to see Xerxes. If he holds out that scepter, she lives. If not, she dies. He holds out the scepter. And she goes in and she invites Xerxes and Haman to lunch the next day. Now, Haman gets the news, man, this is wonderful. I get to go to lunch tomorrow with the king and the queen, and she's putting on the banquet. This is going to be really something. So he's excited to go home and tell his wife about it. And he walks out the front door of the gates, and there's Mordecai, that Jew, sitting there in sackcloth and ashes. Ooh, he's got to do something about that guy. Ruins his whole day. So he goes home and he unloads on his poor wife. And his wife and his friends say, Haman, you're the most powerful man in the country next to the king. Why don't you just put up a great big high gallows and put that guy on it tomorrow morning? Haman says, that's a great idea. So they get to work, they build a gallows. But he has to go to Xerxes in the morning and get the okay, but it's just a formality. Well, that night, Xerxes can't sleep. He's wondering, what is it that my queen wants? What's going on? I just can't sleep. So he calls in the chronicles, and he has them read before him of all the good deeds. And as he's having them read, he says, Mordecai saved me from an assassination attempt. What did we do for this guy? And the scribe says, nothing. Well, guess who's coming right about then? Haman shows up. And he's coming to ask to be able to put Mordecai on that gallows. Xerxes says, how should I honor someone who has done great things for the king? Well, Haman thinks, who else has done anything greater than me? After all, I'm the second in command. It must be me he wants to honor. This is what I would like. He says, for the man whom the king wishes to honor, let royal robes be brought, which the king has worn, and a horse that the king has ridden, and a royal crown on his head. Let the robes and the horses be handed over to one of the king's most notable officials. Let him robe the man whom the king wishes to honor, and let him conduct the man on horseback through the open square of the city, proclaiming before him, thus shall it be done to the man whom the king wishes to honor. The king says to Haman, quick, take the robes and the horse, as you have said, and do to the Jew Mordecai, who sits at the king's gate. Leave nothing out that you have mentioned. Can you just imagine? I almost imagine one of these cartoon things where the jaw hits the ground, and the eyes bug out, and it's like, what? Talk about humiliating. This man he hates, Haman now has to honor. So Haman takes the robes and the horses, robed Mordecai, and led him riding through the open square of the city, proclaiming, thus shall be done for the man to whom the king has honored. When Haman brought Mordecai back to the king's gate, he hurried home and told his wife and friends what had happened. And they took this as a bad, bad omen. About this time, the king's eunuch arrives to escort him to Esther's banquet. Here, Xerxes, he just can't hardly stand it. He's so excited, too, to have this banquet. And he wants to know, what is it you want, Esther? What do you want? Up to half of my kingdom. Just tell me. He's so excited. Queen Esther answers, if I have won your favor, O king, and it pleases the king, let my life be given to me. That is my petition, and the lives of my people, that is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king. Then King Xerxes says to Esther, who is he and where is he? Who would presume to do this? Esther says, an enemy, a foe, this wicked Haman. Then Haman is terrified before the king and queen. The king rose from the feast in wrath and went into the garden palace. But Haman stayed there to beg for his life from the Queen Esther, for he saw that the king had determined to destroy him. When the king returns from the palace garden to the banquet hall, Haman, the queen's sitting over here, and Haman has thrown himself on the couch begging for mercy. But to the king, it looks like he's attacking her. He said, the king says, will he even assault the queen in my presence in my own house? As the words left his mouth of the king, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs in attendance on the king, said, look, the very gallows that Haman has prepared for Mordecai, whose words saved the king, stands at Haman's house 50 cubits high. And the king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he planned for Mordecai. Then the king's anger abated. Okay, we've cleaned up one part of the mess, but there's a second part. The decree is still out there. And the decrees of the Medes and Persians can't be changed. Xerxes gives Mordecai Haman's place. Esther requests that Xerxes rescind the order, but he can't. It's not done. So Mordecai has to write another decree, make 127 copies, stamp it with the signet ring, and send them out to the 127 provinces. And what it says is that the Jews are to fight for their lives. They're to prepare. So when the day comes, the Jews, well, they slaughtered their opponents. Their opponents were in fear of them, but they took no plunder. This is the Jewish holiday known as Purim, which means lots, because Haman, he didn't know exactly when he was going to have them killed, so they cast lots for what month, and then they cast lots for what day. So what do we learn from the story of Esther? God isn't even mentioned in the book, only in passing. Cyrus had given the Jews the right to return to Jerusalem years before, in 537 BC. But most didn't leave. And there had been other opportunities for the Jews to return to Jerusalem, but they hadn't. And because they hadn't, they were in this situation. Certainly, Mordecai and Esther, they hid the fact that they were Jews. Esther, she was beautiful and lovely and obedient. But Mordecai must have known the kind of life Esther would lead in a palace harem. What was he thinking? I think what we see here is another example of how God can create a good thing from a bad situation. Joseph was sold into slavery, yet he became the second in command of Pharaoh, and he saved Egypt and his family. Daniel is taken into captivity in Babylon, becomes a trusted advisor to Nebuchadnezzar and to Cyrus the Mede. And now we see Mordecai become a trusted advisor of Xerxes. Kings and pharaohs don't seem to be any match for God. Do we have problems too big for God? Is that even possible? And who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for just such a time as this? Dear Heavenly Father, we've seen so many places in the Bible of how you have taken situations that weren't the best, but you worked for your people, done the best you could for them. We know, Lord, that you can do the same for us. Each and every day when sin assails us, you can help us through it. We ask, Lord, that your hand will be upon us, your Spirit to guide us. In thy name, amen.